Hello everyone. This is part 6 of the paper discussion. We were discussing paper 1 of English Literature Optional 2025 and we have discussed question number 6. So today we'll be discussing question number 7, paper 1, part B. So this is what we are going to discuss today, section B, question number 7. Let's have a look at the question. So the question is question number 7. It says examine the concept of virtue constructed and challenged through the characters of Tom and Sophia in the novel Tom Jones. Okay, so it is about Tom Jones. It is a fairly long novel, and the question asked to examine the concept of virtue constructed and challenged through the characters of Tom and Sophia. So, character sketches, and you have to prepare the important characters of all the novels. So, if we talk about Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, so it is. Virtue here in this novel is not static list of rules, but it is of dynamic quality that combines an innate good heart and with the acquired wisdom of prudence is also evident there. So Fielding uses Tom and Sophia to challenge the hypocritical and rigid moralism of the 18th century and suggests that true virtue is found in sincerity and benevolence rather than a mere outward reputation. So Fielding constructs virtue primarily through Tom's good nature. This good nature is an instinctive desire to do good to others. So this is constantly contrasted with characters like Blifil or the philosophers like Squire, who possess virtue in paper but are malicious in practice. When we can also quote some examples like Tom repeatedly sells his possessions to support the destitute Seagram family, while the so-called pious Blifil uses religion to mask his greed, and Tom's impulsive generosity, though often landing him in trouble, is presented by Fielding as a more authentic form of virtue. Also, Tom's character radically changes the traditional construction of virtuous hero. He's physically promiscuous, engaging in affairs with Molly Seagram and Mrs. Waters and Lady Bellaston. So Fielding argues that Tom's vices are those of flesh, not of the spirit. Unlike Blifil, whose soul is cold and calculating, and Tom remains loyal to Sophia in his heart. But also Fielding uses Tom to suggest that a man can be good despite being sexually fallible. So this was against the rigid moralists of the time. And Sophia's name indicates her role as a moral compass of the novel. Her virtue is constructed as a balance of modesty and intelligence. When Sophia's father, Squire Weston, attempts to force her into a marriage with the hateful Blifil, Sophia's virtue is challenged. So she does not simply submit. Rather, she asserts her moral right to refuse a man she cannot love. So her to London is a virtuous act of self-preservation and integrity. Also, Fielding constructs virtue as an incomplete project without prudence. Tom has the good nature, but he lacks discretion and foresight. So his virtue is constantly misunderstood as his reputation is constantly ruined. So Tom's imprisonment in the London and his near execution serves as the ultimate challenge of his character. So Fielding suggests that this good nature thing is a dangerous quality unless it is guided by caution. So Tom must learn to protect his virtue from the snares of the world before he is worthy of Sophia. Also, the novel also challenges the social construction of virtue as something tied to blood or legitimacy. So, as a bastard, Tom is legally and socially considered low and inherently less virtuous than the legitimate Blifil. So Fielding proves that Tom's inherent goodness outshines Blifil's legitimate wickedness. So at in the end, the union of Tom and Sophia represents the reconciliation of Tom and wisdom of Sophia, suggesting that true virtue is earned through the trial and error and is not inherited or not by birth. So this is all you can. It is just a discussion of the question. You can extract some sentences. You can extract the points which you can write. So that is more the uh, outcome of this discussion. So that we can just discuss so many things which comes and which could be written in the exam. The next question, if we discuss, is analyze the novel Hard Times under the statement, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Okay, so the famous these two lines, these two statements, basically the it was best of time and it is worst of time. It belongs to Charles Dickens' other novel. It is A Tale of Two Cities. So its logic of extreme contradiction is a perfect lens through which we can examine hard times. So novel is built basically on the painful duality um, between the industrial progress of the Victorian era and the spiritual and physical suffering which it caused. So how is it the best? So it is best of the economic wealth. It is the best is talked about basically of the economic wealth, and the worst suggests of the worst of human deprivations. So for the factory owners like the Josiah Bounderby, Coketown represent the best of time because he was earning so much and he was so wealthy. So it is a miracle of production. It is turning raw materials into vast wealth. But the worst, which signifies here, is for the workers. So the mockery of the workers have been suggested by by the use of words the hands. So it is the worst of times. Dickens describes the hands as people who are essentially the same as the machines they tend. So they're more human. They're less humanized and the worst of times he represented there. While Bounderby brags about his self-made success, and Stephen Blackpool lives in the cycle of poverty and legal entrapments, eventually dying in the abandoned mine shaft. So this presents a contrasting picture of the best of the times and the worst of the times for some people. Also the best can be of the age of wisdom versus the age of foolishness, or the age of utilitarianism. Thomas Gradgrind believes that he lives in an age of wisdom where everything can be measured and weighed and governed by facts. But to Dickens, this rigid utilitarianism is actually an age of foolishness because it ignores human heart, and which is evident by the plight of the other characters like Stephen Blackpool. Also, the classroom is described as a plain, bare, monotonous vault symbolizing the death of spirit. Um, Gradgrin's wisdom leads him to marry his daughter Louisa to a much older Bounderby, which is mathematically very perfect. But this wisdom results in total emotional collapse of his children. So this is the worst of the times also. Okay, so other interpretation of best and the worst could be it is season of light. It is a season of fancy, or also but also we can experience the season of darkness. So how is it presented there? Dickens contrasts season of light like the fancy or imaginative play of the time, and also the season of darkness like the industrial landscape is full of smoke, and the yellow smoke is there in the window panes. So Coketown is a town of red brick, and that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. So filled with the black canals and the serpents of smoke are all referred in the novel. Also, Sissy Jupes and Sleary Circus is a embodiment of light and fancy. So it is contrasting the ambience and the Sleary Circus or Sissy Jupes her character is contrast to the place where she's living. The belief that people need to be amused and loved, uh, it represents light. It basically represents fancy. This stands the direct opposition to the darkness of the industrial chimneys that dominate the skyline and the lives of the citizens. Also, novel explores the spring of hope through the character Sissy Jupe, also who remains uncorrupted by the fact-based system. Conversely, the Gradgrind children inhabit the winter of despair. There is other contrast: the spring of hope and the winter of despair. These words can be used. So, Louisa asks her father, "Where are the graces of my soul, and where are the sentiments of my heart?" And the Tom Gradgrind becomes a thief ultimately and a gambler, and because of his childhood was a winter devoid of joy. All the emotions were just calculated and everything was mathematical. But on the other hand, CC provides a spring by caring for the broken family at the end and showing a way of hope uh, through which they can survive. So Dickens ultimately argues that in a society that claims to be in its best of times while neglecting the fancy and the feelings of its people is actually experiencing its worsts. So next we are to consider the Mill on the Floss interrogates the theme of education, particularly in relation to gender and class. So the contrasting experiences of Tom and Maggie. Okay. So we have to consider the mill on the floors, interrogates the theme of education, particularly in relation to gender and class, through contrasting experience of Tom and Maggie. So in the mill on the floors, George Eliot uses education of the Tulliver siblings to critique the Victorian social structures. And education is depicted not as a neutral pursuit of knowledge, but as a rigid tool to enforce gender roles and class aspirations. The most striking interrogation of education in the novel could be the inverse relationship between the siblings' desire for knowledge and their access to it. So Maggie is naturally gifted and displaying the precautious intellectual curiosity. Yet she's denied formal schooling because of her gender. But on the other hand, we can see Tom is has no interest in academic study, but he's forced into to fulfill his father's class ambitions. So Mr. Tulliver famously dismisses Maggie's intelligence, stating a woman's no business with being so clever. It will turn to trouble. Meanwhile, he invests heavily on Tom's education, and even though Tom is slow and prefers practical outdoor activities, still he is forced to study. And Fielding critiques the 19th century obsession with the classical education for the middle class. Tom is sent to study under Mr. Stelling, and whose curriculum is designed for the gentry, not for a miller's son who needs practical business skills. So Tom finds Latin grammar and Euclid utterly incomprehensible, described by Eliot as being a foreign to him as a celestial system. So this highlights the class-based disconnect in education. Mr. Tulliver wants Tom to be a scholar and to protect the family from lawyers like Wickham, but the education Tom receives leaves him ill-equipped with the actual work. So because the Maggie's stolen education, Maggie has irregular educations because she's excluded from the formal system, and Maggie's education is fragmented and dangerous. She attempts to educate herself through Tom's books and later through the influence of Philip Wickham and devotional writings of Thomas a Kempis. uh, when Maggie visits Tom at school, she masters his lessons with ease, proving her intellectual superiority. However, with a structured environment, her mind remains a shadowy army, leading her towards a radical and self destructive renunciation of the world. Her education basically is an escape from the patchwork of domestic chores her mother considers her true education. Also, for Tom, education eventually evolves from the burden into a tool for economic survival and the restoration of family honor. So after his father's bankruptcy, he abandons his failed classical studies for education of the world and the trade. For Maggie, education is always a search of spiritual and emotional resonance, with this provincial society of St. Oaks cannot provide. Also, Tom's rigid adherence to the rules he learned makes him successful in business, but emotionally stunted. He tells Maggie to submit to those who have power. So, this a direct result of social education that reinforces patriarchal dominance. The tragic ending, if we talk about the tragic ending when the siblings drown together, suggests that the divide created by their differing education, it could only be bridged in death. So, where the dusty and noisy warfare of social roles finally ceases. So, this was all about the discussion of the three questions. We'll be discussing these three questions. We'll be finishing paper one, and we'll be moving to paper two, and we'll be discussing other questions also. So, this is it for the video. Thank you.